There's this story of a little girl who was in class one day and she took notice that her teacher was repeating herself a lot. Nearly every instruction, nearly every time she answered a question or speaking in the class, she would go on and she would say it again. Sometimes she'd change the phrasing or she'd even repeat herself verbatim. And this little girl noticed this. She was puzzled by this, and she'd begin to kind of scratch her head and say, I know that we're all not, Einsteins in the room, but we're pretty bright group of kids. Like, why is she doing this? None of us are that dull, right? And so this little girl was kind of like troubled with it. She was puzzled by it. She was confused. And so after the bell rang and students were packing up their bags and heading to the school bus or the parent pickup line, this little girl kind of marched her way up to the front of the classroom to talk to her teacher. When it was right, she asked this question of ma'am, why do you repeat yourself so much? Do you think that we're bad students or something? And the teacher just smiled. She could see just kind of the genuine curiosity and even perhaps the intenseness, right, of this little girl's attention in the moment. And she smiles and simply says, no, not at all. The teacher would actually go on to say, I repeat myself not because I think that you can't be taught. I repeat myself because I do not want anyone to get lost or left behind. As a parent, I find myself having to repeat myself often to our wonderful kids. But friends, this thing that we do as communicators, as people in the world, as parents, as bosses, employees, or coworkers, or students and teachers, whatever it may be, we sometimes repeat ourselves, not because we feel like it maybe didn't, maybe perhaps the person isn't understanding or the person is dull in that way, but we want to make sure that what we're sharing doesn't get lost in all of the craziness of everything. You see, our Heavenly Father is the same way. He repeats himself a lot. And what's fascinating is that there is something that he repeats more than anything else in the Word of God. And it's not for the reason that perhaps we've always embraced it. You see, this phrase is not to love others. While God does say this, it actually verbatim in that sort of way only comes out about a dozen times throughout the Bible. It's to it's not to, the expression of giving thanks to God and to have a heart of gratitude in those ways. I mean, that expression comes out a lot. It comes out about 150 to about 170 times, depending on the English translation you're reading. But you see, the most repeated phrase that God gently shares over and over and over again with his children is, do not be afraid. He says this 365 times throughout the Bible. That's one for every day of the entire year. And you see, God repeats himself. He repeats himself not because fear is this, this evil act that we do. It's not because it's this part of us that is evil or selfish. God repeats himself so much because he does not want us to get lost in our fear. Knowing the life that we live, and not just knowing it from afar, he made it so clear when he stepped into the world, when Jesus came to the world and he lived a human life. He went through all of the same hardships and tragedies. His father died when he was young, and he lost a friend at other points, and he had people who betrayed him. He had people who came against him. He was born into a very poor family. He didn't grow up with all of the cool gizmos and gadgets. He understands the struggle. But Jesus even himself repeats this phrase often to his disciples when they're perhaps in a moment where they're out and in the sea and the water is rough, or they're in other moments where Jesus is trying to demonstrate a miracle or does some sort of powerful teaching. He says often, do not be afraid. Fear and anxiety and anxiousness have been a regular and constant part of our human experience since Genesis chapter 3. Like, understand that. It was the very first human emotion experienced after Adam and Eve chose to sin against God. After their moment of disobeying, they immediately become anxious at the exposure of their body and try to be, covering themselves with plants and different things that they could find. When they hear God, and it's so beautiful that it writes this, that they hear the footsteps of God in the garden coming towards them, they are afraid, they're anxious, they're worried, they're terrified, and so they do what? They hide. They first hid themselves, and then they hid underneath something or trying to run away from God. And understand, it was selfishness that made them disobey. But it was fear and anxiousness that convinced them that God didn't want anything to do with them anymore. The Latin word for anxiousness is anxus, which means distressed and troubled, fearful, worry, uneasy. But what's fascinating is that it comes from the classical Greek word anko, which means to choke and restrict. And I can't help but see and hear the similarity between anko and anchor, something that we use to keep our boats from moving, that restricts and ties down. You see, understand that over the course of human history, every language, every culture that has ever existed has words to describe this feeling of being concerned, being scared, being overwhelmed, being full of worry, this feeling of being greatly restricted and even choked in our life. And every culture has had its social responses to it. For generations, saying that you were anxious would destroy the way that people saw you. It would make you appear weak in front of others. So it has been tabooed, it has been suppressed, and even in the church, people saw God's words of do not be afraid, another form of suck it up, another phrase of man up. So even our church history has done a bad job at embracing why our Father repeats himself over and over again to not worry, to not be afraid. On the positive side, with the social climate and landscape of today, we have found our culture becoming ever more okay with talking about it. And so terms that were once used to describe very niche or narrow medical realities are now used broadly outside of the medical community and just in common language and how we interact with each other and how we describe what we're feeling. And you see, we've taken some steps forward in some of this, but understand is that we are still several steps short from getting to approach our anxiety as a culture so we can actually experience the life that God has intended for us to live. One where we aren't drowning in fear, we aren't drowning in anxiousness, but one that we are actually feel free in. And perhaps you sit in the room and you think, I don't know about this. All I've ever known is this. All I've ever known is this life in this way and these things happening in me. But our Father knows us. He doesn't stand there like a judge casting this, do not be afraid or you're going to mess up. He instead is one who gets down on his knees and puts his arms and says, it's going to be okay. You don't have to be afraid. And you see, I don't want us to miss these commands and this invitation from God. You see, understand that for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be leaning into this conversation about anxiety and darkness in our mind and things that we feel very strongly. These are conversations that ever since the kind of the tail end of last year, as we plan out kind of our message series throughout all of 2024, I have been looking forward to this, friends. I don't know if I'm allowed to have a favorite, but this is one of them, okay? Because, friends, this is a necessary conversation. Because even as people who are chasing after Jesus, there are still parts of our personal reality that are lacking, and we're puzzled in how to work through them and understand is that God does want to care for us in the midst of it all. There's actually a collection of books written by a licensed psychologist, and this man loves Jesus, and he writes this collection of books, and I've listed them in the church app, and I encourage you, in this message series, we're just going to skim the surface. We're going to see the tip of the iceberg throughout the whole way, but I encourage you in your personal life, whether it be through an audiobook or an ebook, or you order it paperback, whatever it is, I encourage you to indulge in this and to read. And so you'll find, and I'll share them every week. That way, perhaps if you don't catch it today, you can catch it next week. But on the church app, there's a list of a few books at the very bottom of the note sheet. But friends, understand that one of the most clear and difficult things that this gentleman who writes, as he tries to invite people into this non-anxious lifestyle, is this building block that is very easy to say out loud, but it is very hard to actually bite into and to live. And it is so essential in the journey that if forgotten, or if ignored, or if not even, given proper attention to, then we would actually never even make it to the others. And friends, this morning we will lean into this building block reality of choosing to find reality. Choosing to find reality. A few years ago when I was traveling for work, my flights got delayed as I was trying to make my way home. I was stuck down in Tampa at a pastor's gathering and coming back home and trying to connect through Charlotte to get back to Charleston. And my flights had gotten delayed and things were all messed up. And I had missed, all the schedules were messed up. And I for sure had missed my connection from Charlotte to Charleston. But eventually I got from Tampa to Charlotte, and it was perhaps midnight or a little thereafter. And they said, hey, we'll put you in a hotel room. We're so sorry, all these things, and we'll get you on the first flight home tomorrow morning. And in that moment, I said, I really want to get home. Would you rent me a rental car? And they said, yes, because Charlotte's only a couple hours from home. I don't mind driving if it means that I get home tonight. At this time, Aaron, we were not pregnant yet with Nora, but Mason would have been about 2 years old, and I had been gone the entire week, and I was ready to see my crazy little boy. And you see, so there in the middle of the night, Erin was fast asleep, and the last that she had heard is that she'll see me the next morning. So I thought, what a great surprise. And so I get the rental car, jump on the road, and I am zooming down the road and pull into our driveway at about 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the morning. And I'm just so excited to be home. I'm such a great husband, or all these things. I'm like, she's going to love this, right? And just kind of slip into bed and say, a kiss on the cheek and say, hey, it's me, right? All that stuff, just beautiful, heartwarming, all that stuff. Well, you see, I quietly park the car, walk into the house, and quietly pull up my key and unlock our side kitchen door. And I'm quiet, but, doors make creaks, right? And as I open the door and step inside, I've done such a great job at being as quiet as possible. But then all of a sudden I hear two sounds that I have actually never heard in the way that I've heard them before. The first was our dog. Man, when our dog Jax at this time comes roaring into the kitchen, ready just to attack. If you know our dog, he is a wild but friendly little dude, big dude, but he's a big dog, but he is friendly and he's great with our kids, but he comes roaring and growling, and in that moment, I was so proud. He's such a great guard dog. I always thought that he would run from danger, right? How great is he that he came to, attack me? And I'm like, Jax, it's okay, Jax. And I kneel down on him. I'm like, hey, it's me. You heard my voice. It's okay. And he comes up and he's wagging his tail, all this stuff. And I'm like, man. And then I go on to hear the next sound. A sound that I've heard a lot, but never in this situation. I hear Erin from across the house jump out of bed, and then I hear, and again, proud husband moment. But at the same time, I'm like, she's about to shoot me. And so I hear this sound, and I immediately I step back, and it's pitch black in our home, and I step backwards, and I flip the light switch on in the kitchen. And I say, it's me, it's me, it's me. Man, for a moment, she thought a stranger, a threat, had come and broken into the house and would bring great harm to her and the kid, or her to Mason. But man, as soon as I was able to flip on the light switch, she would see who I really was. And friends, this morning, as we choose to begin to find reality, we need to make the hard decision to turn on the lights. Because sometimes in our conversations, in our own processing of what we feel, we have missed the fact that we've been trying to do all of this in the dark. And in the dark, there is confusion. In the dark, there is more worry, and the threat is even heightened. In the dark, a lion can sound and seem, or a kitten can sound as terrifying as a lion. I say this not to diminish the weight or the struggle of what we experience. I say that because perhaps this impossible fight that you have always been losing to is one that is much more possible than you thought. You see, I say that because we have a tendency to trust our interpretation of moments, feelings, and situations, and we never take a pause to acknowledge that there is a very fractured foundation that we begin from. We discovered this a few months ago when we were in our Romans Bible study series. But in Romans chapter 1, Paul makes it very clear as he's speaking to all of the church and all of God's people and speaking to humanity. He says this in Romans chapter 1, verse 21, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And although they claimed to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being, birds and animals and reptiles." And he goes on to say in verse 28, I do not want us to miss this. In verse 28, "Furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to a depraved mind." Understand is that when we come into the world, we are people with a very depraved, broken mind that cannot truly interpret all of our human experience in a way that is healthy and pure and true and straight and narrow and right. Understand that like a pebble that is dropped into a bucket or a large body of crystal clear water, and you can see it slowly sink down to the bottom, in the same way that our mind, as we've exchanged our understanding of the Lord, and as people who've been separated from God, we've exchanged the truth for a lie, for reality for an illusion. And as a result, God kind of let us go, and that's what happened to us. And that's why Adam and Eve were so quick to think that this being that just created them now wants to destroy them and kill them. So they hid. Our default is not knowing what is true, straight, and real, but actually what isn't. What are half-truths, what are illusions, what are false narratives, and understand that the binoculars that we're trying to view our life and our experience through are very fractured and are very broken. And then pack on top of that trauma, pack on top of that big things and small things that have happened to us, things that scar us, and that we even try to emotionally recover from, but it's like our body remembers. When we see that same colored car drive by, it's not that same person driving, but man, our body tenses. When perhaps we've been in an accident and we're back on the road for the first time, our body just, it tightens away. It remembers things. And pack on top of that years of observing people, but not all people, but from the pockets of humanity that we have been around, our family system and our community and other parts even of the world, we view our interactions as even perhaps assumptions of the way that all people are. Pack on top of that, learned rhythms of cause and effect, and after a while, because we've seen the cause so many things and we've seen the effect, whenever the effect comes, we just assume we know the cause. And so if the feeling happening inside of me is this, I know that this is the reason that it was caused. We start off very blind, and we see glimpses of light. But understand that word there used in verse 28, depraved, understand it means counterfeit. It means not real. It means false. It means something that is fake, but presenting itself as what is real or true. Liam, would you mind coming up for me when we get to do this thing that we've been talking about, brother? See, I have a gift for you, Liam. I have this gift. It's in this back pocket. I have a $5 bill, and that's yours to keep from here for the rest, until you spend it. But it is yours from this moment on. Happy early birthday, whatever. But Liam, let's say, for example, I wanted to get that from you, and so I'm like, hey, I got $5 right here. Could we switch? Would you want to take this? You sure? I mean, it's the same number, right? And we say, okay, I'll tell you what, you're driving a hard bargain. I got 100. I mean, you can't say no to this, right? I mean, I have $100, and I'll even toss in the 5 right there because I'm generous. Like 100. You sure you want to? I mean, it's just 5. This is 105. You sure you don't want to trade? Man, I got a wad of 500s right here. I mean, you can count all of it. Probably like 20 or 30 500s in there. I mean, and I'll toss in all of this. This is so much money. Would you trade now? Why? That's right. Because this is not real money. And that is. Can we give Liam a round of applause, right, for doing an amazing job? But understand, we go through life and we accumulate a lot. And every now and then there's some real bills that slide in. Understand that. But when we come to making decisions and we come to processing what's right inside of us, we whip out this giant wad of cash ready to do business. A lot of it's not real. And friends, I want us to understand this morning that there are three major counterfeit ideas that we believe about our anxiety that, man, have been leading us down roads of great unhealthiness and great sorrow. Friends, this first counterfeit idea that we have lodged and banked our buck with, this idea is that anxiety means that something is deeply wrong with us. Understand, friends, that this is not the case. We have these emotions, these feelings, these great restrictions happening within inside of us, and we couple it with this idea that I am such a mess and I am so broken and there's something greatly wrong within me. We feel deep emotions and our body reacts in certain ways to certain situations, and we just can't help but feeling like a broken human being. And now we are, but I don't mean in that kind of understand is that we interpret a lot of this as feeling and being very convinced that we are very broken. But understand is that our anxiety and these feelings inside of us are not pointing to something greatly wrong inside of us. Understand that what is real, what we cannot miss, is that anxiety is this alarm that is going off, telling us that something around us isn't right in our life, or something is happening that is not the way it should be happening. And our body can feel it, and we've have past things that have happened, and so when we come into future moments, we feel these moments where there's an alarm, like, this is a terrifying thing. I got hurt last time in this scenario. Like, can I trust it again? And we find ourselves in conversations or when someone tells us, hey, can we talk? Like, in the same way that we've had in the past, these triggers, these things come into our being. And they're alarms telling us, watch out. Something isn't right. Be careful. This hurt you last time. And you see, understand is that this also leads to our second great counterfeit idea, is that when the alarms go off, we have this idea that there is always a problem in front of us. Understand, sometimes there is. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes our anxiety is the result of a false alarm. Not meaning that we haven't learned something, but meaning that in the situation that we are presently in, there is not a threat like there was before. And this is so important, friends, because we've been through some junk. And those memories and those scars, those lessons, all those things are very much a part of us. And it's like we find ourselves again presented in the same situation, and we want to run. Sometimes our insecurities are telling us information that is not true. Sometimes your imagination or your thought process or your ruminating, your assumptions of what people think about you, or you're kind of assuming how a conversation might play out between you and someone else. We always go towards the negative because that is just the way that we lean, don't we, friends? And friends, I'm a very optimistic person, but I am right there with you. When someone says, hey, can we talk, or hey, can this, I lean directly to the negative. Because even though 9 times out of 10, it's nothing crazy, nothing bad, or nothing damaging, there's that one time that is like that bad apple that spoils the rest. And so it's there. The feelings are real. But perhaps what we perceive to be a threat in front of us is not real. Perhaps sometimes, and for a few, there's this chemical, biological issue that needs attention, where our internal alarm system isn't working as it should, and it's registering candles as house fires. And so we respond so extreme to such small things. So perhaps there's a reality inside of us that needs to be checked and cared for that we have ignored. Perhaps it's not false alarms, but perhaps we have certainly exaggerated issues. And friends, understand is that while we have become a people that openly talk more about these feelings we have in the moments we have them, understand that our best handling of them has been our third main counterfeit idea that we have put all of our stock in. This idea that our anxiety is best handled with avoidance. That somehow if I can just sweep it under the rug, or somehow if I can just suck it up, if somehow I can just push through, if somehow I cannot deal with this right now, then it'll be okay, then I'll be okay. But then all of a sudden it revisits again And perhaps that immediate moment is resolved, but then the same internal response that we did not enjoy the first time pops up again in the future, and it keeps on coming back like this insane roller coaster ride that we do not enjoy, that the people around us do not enjoy. Understand that our anxiety is best handled with intentionality. This does not require you to be a strong person. This does not require you to be a person who is well disciplined. It simply requires you to make a choice and understand you can leave it all in the dark and you can let it sit there. Or you can bring it out into the light and process through it and give attention to it and focus on it and ask these questions of, why am I feeling this way right now? Is this feeling really valid? Is there something really happening that I can kind of attach and connect the dots to? And I love to ask myself this question of, what's the one thing that if we're different, I wouldn't feel this right now? Like, what's the one thing, perhaps on a bad Monday or whatever it could be, what's the one thing that if it were different, then I would for some reason be in a different kind of mood? Friends, understand when all these things are left in the dark, these kittens can roar like lions, and they're terrifying, and they easily consume us. But understand, as you start to ask these questions and begin to process through them, finally we can bring them out into the light and reveal them for what they really are. The anxiety you feel about where you are in life may have more to do with you comparing yourself or competing with others than it really has to do with some sort of lack of accomplishment. The anxiety you feel when it comes to the loneliness that you feel with where you are may have to do not with a lack of relationships, but may have to do with this internal insecurity, obsession over the negative, and how we obsess over how we are not loved. We look at how our spouse behaves and how they don't love us or they don't hear us. And we look, and some of that may be valid and true, but understand we obsess over the negative. We never even glance into the light, and we never say, wow, they did the dishes, they do love me. Or wow, this person tried to love me in their way of loving people, and so they do love me. And imagine if we just changed some of those things around, and even on our friendships and our relationships. Sometimes life is busy with kids and soccer and sports and just life. So we don't mean to lack interaction. And perhaps all the interaction we have is a text or a phone call. But our obsession with the negative tells us that, our friends don't really care about us anymore. We haven't been invited to the things, or we haven't, been included. But perhaps some of the reality might be that life is just busy. And so they reached out with a text, and that was their way of loving us. Or perhaps they have invited us, but we were just busy and couldn't be a part of it. Friends, the anxiety we feel around our finances is probably not because you don't make enough money. It perhaps may have more to do with the lack of teamwork in your marriage, and it may have more to do with the lack of organization in your finances. Because to answer this question, yes, in this time and place, we feel the financial tensions of inflation and the things that are happening in this world around us. But the reality is that we do make more money this year than we did last year, but we feel just as much in a mess as we did last year as we do this year. And probably are, even if we were to have a major pay increase, even if we were to make a lot more money or pick up another job, perhaps we would actually just have more of the same, and we would just be in a bigger mud hole next year. Wasn't it Christopher George Latour Wallace who said, more money, more problems? Also goes by Biggie Smalls, but I think it's fascinating just to know his real name. Perhaps the anxiety we feel in our marriage and the lack of excitement or connection that is there is not so much around a gap that can never be closed, but perhaps, unlike our physical wounds that heal on their own, perhaps there are things that need to be brought into the light and talked about and discussed. Because they take a beating. Our relationships, our marriage, our dating relationships, they take a beating. And we just try to smile our way through. Well, we do that as people in the world, and we do that with people that we're in close proximity with. Perhaps it's through counseling or through goal setting together or being a team with one purpose. We can finally step into freedom. Friends, the list goes on for all the anxieties we embrace and understand. We have to do the hard work of bringing it into the light, of choosing to find reality within what we're feeling. Because I encourage you so much that the strictness and the tensions and the tightness that you embrace and feel and that are very, very real are not supposed to be the way that we are meant to live. But we have just adopted this lie that that's just a part of life, and so we move on. It's just a part of being married. It's just a part of being in our 30s or 40s. It's a part of having kids. It's a part of being in this stage of life. It's a part of being a young adult. It's just a part of life. Now, understand there are some tensions that are good that grow us, and we'll get to that later on. But we have to do the real work of bringing it into the light so we can discover what is truly real. Friends, I love, and as I've been preparing for today, I love this thought around where Jesus was with his disciples, and he was pointing to going away one day and building a home for them. He was pointing to what would come next, and they were confused, and they asked, how do we get there? How do I get there? And he answered to them this beautiful, beautiful statement that we know and can say with our heart. We know that in John 14:6, this I am the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, and no one goes to the Father except through me. And what's fascinating is that the word for truth means an experience grounded in reality. And so just in my own curiosity, my own wondering, I think it's beautiful perhaps that when Jesus says this, he says, I am the way to experiencing what is real and good and pure on earth and in heaven. Like, I am the source. And now you could take this conversation and go the self-help route and try to climb the mountain on your own. You may get far, but there are parts of us that need care, that need comfort and counsel, that only the one who made us can reach in and tinker with and heal. And last time I checked, our theology that we all share, what Jesus was very clear about when he was spending time with his disciples and saying goodbye, I'm heading to the cross, is that one day the Spirit of the living God would be given to them and would dwell and live inside of them. And I love what he counsels them in John 14, verse 16 and 17. Jesus is saying this, he says, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him. And for he lives within you and will be with you always. He says later in verse 26, but the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you all things and will remind you of everything I have said to you. And then Jesus says this, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give as the world does. He says this, do not let your hearts be troubled. And do not be afraid. Maybe our fear has been winning for a long time. To making us think thoughts about ourselves that we would rather not think. It's hindered our relationships. It's hindered our jobs. It's hindered our community and our way of life. And friends, the one that we have placed our trust in has given us His Spirit to lead us into peace and lead us into life and lead us into a non-anxious life. So friends, I encourage you, begin this journey with me of choosing to find reality within the midst of the feelings of anxiousness and depression and even fear and worry that consume you. We'll get to hard things. We'll talk about the things we can't control. We'll talk about the things that are so heavy we can barely withstand it. But friends, right now is just about the willingness of bringing what is hiding in the darkness into the light. Can we stand and pray together?